Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to a newbie's guide to Tactics Ogre Reborn. So this is a game that has quite a lot of potential mechanics to it. Definitely can be quite a deep rabbit hole to get into, and it's going to be super overwhelming for new players. However, there's actually just a very limited amount of stuff that you need to know to really start thriving and understanding things. See, a lot of these little hidden mechanics and whatever else, even though I have an entire channel dedicated to them, are stuff that you're really not realistically expected to know in order to actually win stuff. In many cases, these are supposed to be a, oh, that's kind of neat, and then you move on kind of moment, you know? So I wanted to explain what's actually important, because this is in many ways an inversion of what a lot of RPGs try to go for. This is a game where you're basically expected not to grind. This is a game where you're expected to immerse yourself in the story and essentially fight unfair at every opportunity. So that's what I wanted to get into here, as far as what you can be paying attention to, what you should be paying attention to, and what actually matters in this game. Okay, so let us go ahead and get into it here. So first and foremost, you'll notice these colorful icons all over your people. This is going to be your kind of first layer of who has an advantage over who. So every element has some advantage over another element. So if we hit the select menu, if you're on the Switch or the Steam Deck, it would be whatever's on your top left of your system. But either way, you hit your equivalent of your select button. Actually, nobody uses... Okay, function button, whatever the hell it is on the PlayStation at this point. They keep renaming it. Just call it the select button. Anyway, point being, every element will have a strength versus another element. My religion beats yours, so to speak. So air will go and erode the earth will nullify lightning will course through the water will put out fire will melt ice, and ice will go ahead and freeze the air. If you've ever lived in Michigan, this is very immersive. Now, light and dark will oppose each other. This essentially means that if one unit is fighting a unit that they're strong against, they're inherently going to have an advantage against them. And vice versa. If you, for example, are fighting a boss, you would probably want to send a unit that is of a strong element versus that particular boss. Now, that being said, that's the first layer. The second layer I want you to be aware of is that while all of this equipment stuff is important and definitely will serve a function throughout the entire game, you really don't need to know as much about this as much as you need to know about debuffs. So our second visit is essentially going to be to the store. And actually, before we visit the store, I want to point out something. Unlike many RPGs, your people are not training up from nothing. They are not doing the hero's journey. They are already trained soldiers in the middle of a war. They don't need to be babysat all the way through. You give them skills, you give them the tools to do their job, they will do their job. That's what they're here for. This is, funnily enough, not even like XCOM, because they also come in like babies. Essentially, all soldiers in this game will already be good to go when you get a hold of them, unless you're intentionally buying rookies from the shop. So, we'll talk about recruiting more in just a moment, but let's go ahead and take a visit to the shop. What's important in here? Man, that is a lot of equipment. We're going to pay attention to none of that. Let's go down over here. So, first of all, let me just say I skipped over the equipment because in most cases I would recommend not buying equipment unless you're looking for one specific thing. That equipment is very expensive in the store, and you'll usually be picking new things up from dead bodies. So go ahead and just leave that stuff in there. But one thing that you do want to stock up on is going to be your items. So items are going to be some of the most important things throughout this game. So, first things first, you'll notice a lot of different versions of healing. I would typically recommend sticking with your cleric as much as possible because these healing items get expensive. But if you must use a healing item, I would recommend A, only keeping one on a slot at any given time, and 2, pay attention to this recovery time over here. This is surprisingly important. See, everything you do in this game has a recovery time associated with it. This is the amount of time it takes to do that thing. So, for example, if you were to look at your weapons, every single one of them would have this recovery time on there. So using one of those heals takes about the same amount of time as swinging this axe. But this heavier axe, well, that takes considerably more time to swing. Now, part of the reason that I say that essentially you don't have to worry about equipment that much is because all of this equipment, to some degree, can last in the long term. Like the upgraded version of this Volge spear right here is something I was still using several hundreds of hours into the game. there's many weapons that can be useful for a lot of oddly specific things. Like, let's say there's a hidden feature with every boulder weapon where it does additional damage versus undead things, and that might be something you need at some point. So as a general rule, don't buy from the shop, and also don't sell your equipment unless you've got a ton of stuff on hand. Like, I've got a ton of these bronze helmets, everyone already has something in their helmet slot, I can afford to get rid of them. My general rule is to stick to a stock of about 20, that way, essentially, even if you need to sell a few more, you can sell a few more, but if you decide to hire on more people, you have more equipment to give them. Alright, let's get back to these items here. So, as I said, these items are going to be very important. Your debuff removal items, essentially, most of these you'll kind of pick and choose as you go along, as you kind of feel out what things are a threat to you. But as a general starting point, your highest health units should probably carry at least one antidote on them. Essentially, your poison in this game scales based off how much health something has. It will lose 10% of its health for every turn that it's poisoned, making it very insidious over the course of a long period of time. So your heavier units, and those that are going to be far away from their healers, should definitely keep at least one antidote on them. Additionally, I would recommend keeping at least one Zolia Draught on any of your healers there. There's not too many sources of charm in this game, and you might realize that every soldier can actually throw a stone, which also gets rid of sleep and charm, so why would you ever carry this item? So this is the tricky thing about this game, where you sometimes gotta think what the AI might think when it comes to your strategy. So like a Zolia Draught, if a unit is charmed, their first thought is going to be of themselves. Your units in general are going to tend to be fairly selfish. They are trying to survive this war after all. So if, for example, a unit is charmed and they don't have any, like, immediate kills in front of them or something, their first thought might be, okay, hold on, I'm afflicted with something, I should take care of that. So they'll pop out their little bottle of draught here, and they'll go and take a chug and go back to their normal state of mind. Sometimes you can trick the AI into doing stuff like that. It's pretty handy. Most of the rest of this stuff, like, I would recommend keeping a few revive items on your team, just so you're aware, when you use a revive item, that unit will immediately get a turn, so this actually can be an offensive tool as well. Most of the rest of these, you don't really have to worry about that much. You'll probably get them for free, and you might as well just throw them around the party. Maybe they'll be handy, maybe they won't be. Not too big of a concern. Okay, let's talk about buffs and debuffs. Your three most important items in the shop are going to be right over here. So, you've got the Brand of the Sacrifice. Many new players will start going and running up to bosses around Chapter 2 there, and find themselves in a position where they will fight the boss and decide that the fight is bullshit, because they will attempt to 1v1 honor duel the guy and get their ass kicked. So, the Brand of the Sacrifice is going to be one of those big playing field levelers, where effectively it will reduce the offensive potential of that unit by 50%. That's not a misspeak. 50%. It is basically their offense ceases to be, and this will last for quite a long time. So, if you're ever afraid of a physical hitting boss, keep one of these items on hand, slap it on them, and there you go. Second thing to bear in mind is going to be the Dynast King's Mead. This also will be an item that you'll get several of in Chapter 1 and probably not understand. So the Dynast King's Mead is the opposite, where it will multiply incoming damage versus a target by 50%. So, if you were, for example, in Chapter 1 and you were having a really hard time with Nybeth, and you happen to have that save on hand, or you're still in Chapter 1, I would recommend this. Go take your toughest unit, attack nothing. Give them a Dynast King's Mead, have them run forward, have Canopus flank on the right side of the map, fire 2 times, and go home. Use this item on Nybeth, and essentially those arrow shots will be near fatal every time that they're fired. So these are the two most important buffs to bear in mind if you're ever struggling. Don't use these all the time, but they are something to bear in mind if you're struggling. They are massive breakthroughs in a lot of situations. The third most important item that I would recommend keeping at least one of on every one of your frontliners here is the Jewel of the Avatar. This one is cheap enough to be used every single fight. As I mentioned earlier, you probably shouldn't be spending money on equipment upgrades if you can avoid it. I would recommend actually picking up one ring for every one of your characters, but aside from that, stick with consumables for the most part. So a Jewel of the Avatar will give you at least 20% chance to dodge an incoming physical attack, whether it's a regular sword hit, spear hit, what have you, or a finisher, or a monster hit, or a monster skill, any of that. It will give you a chance to dodge it. You also have smoke bombs over here to help you dodge ranged attacks. So, actually, the next one that I also want you to bear in mind here is your magical cocaine over here in the form of the black lizard powder. So, all of your wizards will have access to concentration. This is a skill that allows them to have Spell Strike activated randomly on their person. This will mean that they will have at least 30% chance to hit with any spell that they use. Now, there's a lot of board game logic to this game, so when it comes to, at least 30%, this means that you can effectively have next to no mind or intelligence or whatever else on that unit, they will still have a chance to, for example, hit poison in a large area. So, concentration plus poison cloud on any one of your casters is something that I would always recommend keeping around. It's an ability that will constantly give you really good returns on your numbers. It's very cheap to use. You typically will recover about 10 MP naturally, and additionally will get more MP for every physical hit that you do or take. So this means that this is very easy to fund in the long term. Meditate will always fund this. And again, if you get shot with an arrow or something, that's also useful to keep in mind. So on something like a wizard, a poison cloud over here could potentially be 50 to 70% odds of doing this massive amount of damage with this poison cloud here. Additionally, you have stuff like Paralytic Wave, which will cause a unit to fail 50% of their actions. You have Torpor, which will slow them down dramatically. This is actually really useful if you want to, for example, recruit somebody and you're getting annoyed at them taking turns. Slow them down. Slowing a unit down is a very viable tactic. Sleep, which will put a unit to sleep and prevent them from taking their turn. Again, bear in mind how I said that. It prevents them from taking their turn. So if, for example, you're afraid of a berserker activating their berserk, if you're afraid of a dragon activating their dragon scale, of a knight that's using phalanx, put them to sleep and their turn never comes, which means that their defense or whatever else is completely normal. Action skills only activate at the start of your turn. And then Charm is fairly self-evident. You've seen Charm in a game before, I'm pretty sure. Okay. So, we've gone a few different directions here, but again, the thing you need to bear in mind is that debuffs and elements are going to be the main things that you need to pay attention to. Not stats, not hyper-specific gear upgrades or whatever else. Those are the two that you want to pay attention to. The only hyper-specific gear upgrades you really need to know to really thrive are going to be the ones with debuffs. So, for example, you'll see right here, this spear, this does breach. This sword, this also does breach. However, this unit, this Terror Knight, also inflicts fear with their attacks. And also has concentration for those debuffs I talked about earlier. But in the case of the Terror Knight, the interesting thing about them is that they have, again, a 100% chance to hit ability over here. So, 100% means that it will also guarantee the secondary effect on your weapon, whatever that may happen to be. Sometimes it's just going to boost damage of a particular element, sometimes it's going to disable a unit outright. There's just all kinds of different stuff that can be attached to equipment. In the case of the Zweihander +1 over here, we've got a breach effect, and this combines with the fear effect from this weapon over here, which means that this guy will be hitting 2 debuffs at once. Now, why is this significant? Well, you see, the third element that I want you to pay attention to is your damage types. You might be thinking I'm talking about this kind of some suchery over here. This is not the damage type that I'm talking about. Just so you know, if it ever says slashing, crushing, piercing, whatever else, that's not where your damage is coming from. A lot of people get confused on that. That is primarily just set dressing. You know what this translates to? This is your penetration value, this is your scaling value, with a pretty icon associated with it. Technically, you'll have things like, this would go and block part of that slashing damage, but realistically speaking, that's not really, it's so normalized across the board that the type of damage here will very rarely matter. So don't worry about that. That 4% scaling damage, that's not going to be where any of your numbers are coming from, it just looks pretty. This will matter way later in the game, in the post-game and stuff like that, but for right now, don't worry about it. Okay, but no, the damage types that I'm talking about are actually melee, ranged, and magic. I know, what is this, RuneScape? So, Melee is going to be fairly consistent, and they are going to have the widest access to what's known as finishing moves. So finishing moves are basically your weapon abilities. These may seem like they're super moves, but they're not. They're basically just different skills that you can use with that weapon. One thing I want to bear in mind, and the reason that I mentioned that they're not super moves, is look at this right here. Remember we talked about recovery time earlier? Well, it's twice faster to use this Ruination over here than it is to actually swing the weapon itself. That's kind of interesting. More on that in a moment. Also, a little bit of a side note, your weapons will have either a counterattack or a parry effect on there. Parry is going to give you 7% chance to completely negate a physical or ranged attack per rank, and counterattack will give you will essentially rank 1 to 4, and will give you 25% chance to, or sorry, an increase to your counterattack damage. So it will give you the ability to counterattack, and then as it goes up, you counterattack with more of your total damage. Whereas the parry is something that will give you a chance to completely negate that attack. So it doesn't give you the percentages, but yeah, the percentages are 7% per rank. Okay, so let's talk about these finishers. So these are one of the reasons that you want to always diversify your people. Diversity is your strength. And having a wide variety of different weapons will give you a wide variety of different finishers, and finishers are important. For example, this unit, by herself, if she were to punch an air unit, she would be resisted, but if she punched a lightning unit, because she is earth, she would be doing a decent bit more damage. But basic melee damage is not really how you win in this game. Basic melee damage is primarily used for two things. A, it's free, and B, you gain a little bit of MP every time you use it. So essentially, there's some skills, like right here, which will improve your physical damage, your like normal physical damage. But if you're actually looking to get those big, punchy, smash throughs, you want to be using elemental finishers over here. So for example, the Fist will come in with Flaming Fist. This will mean that if she punches on an ice unit, it will do dramatically more. If that unit is breached, there's a non-zero chance that the Flaming Fist will instantly kill them. So that is something to bear in mind, and every one of these is going to be a little bit different. So for example, Rending Gale over here, you might notice, doesn't have an element. Oh no! No, instead it's what I like to call a critical multiplier, where if a unit lands a crit using this, it's a multi-hit move, which means that every one of those attacks is multiplied. So if, for example, they're attacking twice, well, now they are effectively doing 4 times their damage with that attack. That's pretty neat. Or, in the case of the bow, they're getting this Leaden, which could potentially cause a unit to be unable to fly anymore and be slowed down. So that's potentially a useful tool in your arsenal. Everything in front of you is a tool. Everything around you is a tool. And this actually extends over to the map itself. This is a very physical type of strategy. So if we take a look at over here, we'll notice that even these tiles actually affect accuracy. This is actually one of those notions that leads to this idea that there's no such thing as an evasion build in this game, because your accuracy bonuses are pretty high, but if you're paying attention, you can actually twist this to your favor. For example, you know how earlier I said to put a Jewel of the Avatar on somebody? That means they're always going to have at least 20% of a chance to block an incoming attack. Now look at this right here. If a unit fighting on the road is fighting on the road, they've got great footing, and they're going to have 35% accuracy added to their melee attack, but in water that's 0. So what if you were to, let's say, shield bash somebody into that water in order to take away 35% of their accuracy? That's kind of interesting. Alright, so that's potentially an idea. And then what if, I don't know, you were to go over and, let's say, equip something like this, a sword that will inflict Fall Strike. And let's say you had the ability to make that 100% chance. Like we looked over at this warrior over here, and we saw they had this vigorous attack ability. This means that units around them gain 100% chance to hit and also cannot be parried. So we have the two stand right next to each other, and now let's say we give him that Jewel of the Avatar over there to dodge. So we put that over here. We then decided, you know what, it's a lot harder to actually see in the rain, so we get a Horn of the Savage to reduce accuracy from the rain. And then additionally, if we were picking on somebody, we would go use this False Strike ability to make sure that their accuracy can't go above 80%. Because again, there are guarantees on your debuffs. So False Strike means that their accuracy is permanently lowered by 20% until the debuff goes away. Dodge means that your evasion is permanently increased by 20% until it goes away. Concentration, or that black lizard powder, means that your focus when using spells is essentially your accuracy with spells is upped by at least 30% or higher. So this means that the Terror Knight, which normally would have almost no chance to hit with these like Paralytic Wave and Sleep debuffs, now has a ranged attack that will give them a low but still pretty decent chance to take a unit out of the fight. This is the kinds of stuff to be considering. You might have noticed we haven't even really talked about stats, we haven't even talked about growths. All of that stuff is set dressing, don't worry about it. You can min-max all that stuff once you're way, way, way into the game, but this is truly the kind of stuff that you need to know to actually win here. A lot of that stuff is almost a little bit of an intentional troll from the developer's part, because if you're sitting there trying to min-max your stats, you're gonna have a bad time. If you're sitting there trying to grind your way to a win, you're gonna have a bad time. See, the vast majority of the game, like pretty much past Chapter 1, you can expect that the AI will essentially have the stats advantage over you. So essentially they will have levels over you, they will have stats over you, in many cases they'll have gear over you. This is not a fair fight, so you shouldn't fight fair. Essentially, you are the one that gets more strategic options, and you are the one that essentially will be able to make more use of the tools on hand here. The AI is a bit dumber. I mean, granted, they do a lot smarter things in this version, like clumping up into squads and whatnot, but they will still be the ones that essentially get the dumb stat advantage, as it were, which does make them more fun to fight against. And in many ways, they're actually crippled in ways you may not immediately realize. So, like, if you have your wizard over here with, let's say, something like your poison cloud or what have you, you give them their concentration, you give them this the skill over here, this conserve RT, in order to save time, they're going to be essentially, you'll be able to use them to consistently spam poison. But if the AI is using them, they will not use this. Let me tell you right now, this is not a bug, this is an anti-frustration feature, because back in the PSP version, the wizards would cast Paralytic Wave like 24/7, which meant that pretty much your entire team, unless you either ran stun-proof or you basically bashed your head against the desk. It was that kind of situation, where it was just so prolific that it kind of got ridiculous. Well, it basically went from super prolific to they're just wasting their turns. So this time around, they decided, okay, the AI is going to telegraph their attacks. If you're getting paralyzed, it's because that Cyclops was using Howl when they were going and getting near you. You got poisoned, it's because the ninjas were firing their poison arrows, or let's say the Hydra went and breathed on somebody. So just so you know, there are still debuffs coming out of the enemy side, but they're not going to be coming from wizards because of that whole situation. Okay, so one more thing I want to point out. Recruit. This is going to be one of your most powerful tools, full stop. It is only 25 MP to use, and it will have an up to, I believe the highest I've seen anybody report, 42% chance to recruit an enemy unit. So, normally in most games, you would think that recruit is used for the purpose of, let's say, you know, you found a cool unit and you get them on your team. In this case, it's an actual offensive tool. So what I would recommend is actually go and take a couple of your knights and try this out. So normally I recommend new players to go with the buddy system here. So essentially have, let's say, like 2 knights up in front, and they're going to go around, they're going to hit stuff with their swords, and then immediately look for a chance to recruit. Anything 5% or higher, you might as well go for it, because that is not only going to instantly kill the remainder of that unit, it is going to convert them to your side for the rest of that fight and permanently. You get all of their equipment when they join. If you decide to fire them at the end of the match, they'll ask you if you want them to join. You can just tell them no, and you'll get all of their stuff. So effectively this means that you've not only completely robbed them of all of their equipment, you've potentially got a new ally that you never had to train up whatsoever, potentially just having another kind of piece for the board, so to speak, but they are there to break the unit cap for that particular fight. So Recruit is going to be a massively important tool. One thing I want to point out though, Recruit does not work in cases where the unit would not logically be able to talk to you. So again, this game follows a lot of very specific real-world logic. So if you're going to negotiate with somebody, if they're charmed, if they're afraid of you, if they're silenced, if they're asleep, petrified, or unable to talk to you in their normal state of mind, it won't be able to work. So if like they're paralyzed and slowed and and all that, then yeah, they'll be perfectly glad to talk to you. If, for example, they're cursed and speaking in tongues, then, you know, they're going to have a little bit of a hard time going and conveying that they're just looking for an increase to their benefits plan or something. But this technicality, if you're wondering, is how I have a zombie unit over here in Chapter 2, where you can actually go up to Nibeth's zombies and just talk to them, because they are technically people afflicted with the zombie condition. This also applies to if you, for example, find a zombie beast. You don't need a zombie specialist for that. They are technically just a beast. I mean, you're not talking to them in English anyway, so screw it. I guess you're just going over there and just giving them some treats, and it's like, hey, free zombie octopus, fantastic. You know, it's a good time. Alright, and then the last thing that I want to point out, just to get you started. Again, bear in mind, we haven't talked about the RPG mechanics, because you don't really need to worry about it that much. That stuff will sort itself out. But read your Warren report. This man knows what he's talking about. He's got an entire YouTube channel. You should go watch it. His videos are way better than mine. Anyway, let's go ahead and talk about this kind of stuff here. Every now and then, like, this will give you background on every frickin' thing. But every now and then you'll get stuff like this, where new areas will open up. These are going to be the few areas where it's actually worth going and, you know, grinding. Where effectively, if you go into here, you'll get a hold of things like charms to switch your unit's elements, or new items that you may potentially want to use for crafting, like that Catbug Gnawclaw that I showed you earlier. In order to get that, you would have to get that drop from some of the beast units in here. You've gotten the Beast Tamer up to this point, so you can actually just go ahead and use them to go and recruit some of those beast units. So definitely worth considering if you're currently in Chapter 2 and looking to get a hold of some of those. Just so you know, Griffins are probably going to be your best rescue unit in the entire game. Octopi are going to be a great way to essentially launch Breach and Poison at long range, and Cockatrices as well. Everybody loves the Death Chicken, so it's okay, go for it. Actually, if you wanted Swordmasters, Ninjas, and all of that kind of thing, there's several of them to hire in there as well. So go ahead and explore. It's actually a bit of a fun thing to explore the side areas in this version, so go ahead and give it a bit of a shot. Alright, so that's basically what you need to know. There's definitely a hell of a lot more details, but that's the important stuff. Pay attention to your elements, pay attention to your debuffs. Treat your units as if they're already trained and ready to go, you know? So, that is kind of about that. Yeah, pay attention to your surroundings, pay attention to what's around you. Oh, last note, cards. Right, I didn't mention the cards. I apologize. Let's go ahead and run in here real quick, and I will show you about the cards. Okay. Let's go ahead and pick out a team here, throw them down, and show some cards. Okay. Pick a bunch of randos. I probably picked a bunch of the wrong ones for this. Like this guy. Here we go. Let's put our zombie up front. Okay. Man, I love that this version changed the deployment cap. This used to be a deployment cap of 6 back in PSP, which was really strange. It's like you just ran into this fight, and just the first one happened to be weirdly more difficult than the rest of them. Anyway, so one thing to point out about cards. You shouldn't go after them unless it's convenient for you to do so. So the cards spawn like such. Essentially, skills are going to be your most common thing. So essentially, every auto skill will, by default, have anywhere from 25 to 40% odds to trigger at the start of your turn. These cards will increase them by 30%. You don't need to know the specific numbers. Basically, 1 or 2 cards will, well, essentially 2 cards will basically guarantee almost every skill in the game will always activate. Technically, there's some more details. Those won't matter to you for quite a long time. Now, any props broken on the field will spawn a card. So, for example, if somebody were to fire a firestorm over here, actually, let's go ahead and zoom out. If somebody were to fire a firestorm, every one of these areas could potentially spawn a card. However, breaking props by yourself will also do it. So, like, let's say I wanted to go and get some stuff set up, I'd go break the thing and go ahead and collect a card right here. This also means that fire grenades can also be used for burning away grass and such, and it's just something to bear in mind. Additionally, this is something that won't really matter to too many people, but the elements actually will interact with each other in interesting ways. So, you might have noticed I have this lady running and it's still water. This means that when she's going and hitting something with her water and still, it will do a little bit more damage. Though, realistically, this also can be used as a shield. She can't use, for example, an Instill Dark. It actually would have been really handy for her to do so. But this means that if, for example, you have a Rune Fencer or Valkyrie, you should probably equip an Instill that is the opposite of their element to protect them against their weakness. It's just a generally useful tool to have on hand. Alright, and then lastly, just to hammer this point home, there are no weapon categories that are better than other weapon categories, except for books, because just books aren't very good. But either way, everything has its purpose, and you want to diversify as much as possible. So every weapon will have access, or every weapon category has access to different types of debuffs. Every weapon category has access to finishers, so make use of a wide variety of them. Generally speaking, you should try to vary it up as much as possible unless there's something hyper-specific you're going for. Like, for example, I typically will run my knights using swords because their second finisher inflicts poison, and this makes it a lot easier to go and recruit things because it's slowly whittling down their damage, slowly whittling down their health at a consistent rate. So for that, I find it very useful. But, for example, if I was using a wizard, I would probably give them daggers, because their dagger skill will still interact with their magic, essentially going up and still giving them that damage bonus over time. But additionally, that dagger has a chance to parry incoming arrows, and let's say I give them an item to go and defend against arrows, like that smoke bomb I mentioned earlier. That's potentially a very useful thing. Okay, so with that all being said, I think you get the general idea here. Diversify, pay attention to your elements, and again, if you're not playing optimally, whatever else, don't worry about it. It's fine. This is a game that's fairly forgiving as far as making mistakes and making comebacks. This version is probably the most forgiving this game has ever been. It's one of the reasons that I say for most folks to go and start here. But yeah, there's a lot of ways for you to make a big dramatic comeback. If you're feeling a little bit unconfident and you just really like those big dramatic comebacks there, go ahead and put one Blessing Stone on every unit in your team, and then go ahead and just, if you end up losing the fight, go ahead and start throwing out those Blessing Stones, and hey, what do you know, free instant turn for everybody. You know, we just got away with murder over there. Anyway, so that will be about that. Y'all have yourselves a good one. If you have any questions, please, all questions are fair game. There's a lot of weird assumptions that you normally would assume would never come up, but there's always weird questions that come up. So, there's a lot of things to potentially wonder about in this game, so feel free to ask. Everything's all good, and thank you for stopping by. Y'all have yourselves a good one. I will see you in whenever I see you, and take care. Bye.